All right, folks, we're on to the next module. This is module 3, and we're focusing here on weight and chronic diseases. When we talk about overnutrition for the United States, it is something that has evolved pretty suddenly. If you look back at the map in the upper right-hand corner, in 1998, less than 20% of our nation experienced an obesity prevalence of 20%. It was not a lot of people. In 2011, that progressed to 25%, up to 25%, in some states as high as 30%. And now today, when you look at the main map, the prevalence of obesity in some states is greater than 35%. What does that mean for the whole nation? Well, our most recent numbers, 2015-16, is that 39.8% of adults are obese in the United States. 39.8%. 71.6% of our nation is overweight and or obese. So that's cumulative. That's both groups put together. That's almost 3/4 of our population. This is a concern because obesity, though not true for everyone, of course there's always anomalies where some people just hold their weight very successfully and are wonderfully healthy. But for the vast majority of people who experience obesity and even a weight status, this is where we use that BMI as a tool, they are experiencing chronic diseases, and we'll look at those statistics in a moment. Regarding children, 18.5% of all kids experience obesity. The unfortunate part is that a lot of times this is influenced by culture and parental values, which means many of these children are not successful in reducing their weight as they grow in age, which sets them up for shorter life expectancies or lifespans individually and greater incidence of chronic diseases. Back in 2008, it was established that approximately $147 billion in healthcare costs was dedicated just to medication and surgeries and sickness events related directly to obesity. So this is not a cheap cultural phenomenon. It is very financially taxing to our nation. At the bottom of the page, you will notice that there are 2 links there. One is The Weight of the Nation by HBO. This is a series that is talking about the status of America, the evolving obesity epidemic. Absolutely excellent series. One of the chapters in particular takes place in Santa Ana with a community organization working in outreach. Really recommend this if you take a peek at it, especially the Santa Ana section. Otherwise, in terms of data, if you look at stateofobesity.org, you'll get some good numbers there, and hopefully they'll be updating them. Obviously not right now, but sooner than later. Okay, the rates of obesity in the United States really has cultural ties. Question is, what is it about these cultures is promoting higher weight among different groups? For your non-Hispanic blacks, 48.1%. I really want you to be thinking about what is it that would be influencing these groups to have elevated weight. Same goes for Hispanics, 42.5%. Non-Hispanic whites. Folks, there are different values in different cultural groups, different things that influence them. What would those be? If you notice, though, there's a huge drop for non-Hispanic Asians, and this is intriguing because historically Asians have highly valued a lighter body mass, but as they assimilate into American culture, these numbers are changing very rapidly. So what is it that is so different between Asian culture in Asia proper and in the United States? What shifts are altering these first and second generation people? For adults, if you'll notice, the greatest incidence of obesity is going to be with 40 to 59-year-olds. What is it about their age that is impacting their weight. Think about all the different possibilities, please. Regarding youth, as I said before, cumulatively we're looking at 18.5% for all ages. But if you notice, teenagers have the highest incidence of obesity of all ages for youth. What is it about teenagers that would promote obesity? What changes in their lives? All right, how do we even know these statistics? I think that's a really great question. We have two forms of data collection. One is NHANES. NHANES is really cool. What they do is they go out with these trailers and they sweep across America to different communities gathering data. They're going to gather things like people's pulse. They will do some data collection on perhaps DNA, blood samples. They'll look at their teeth. They'll measure their height, their weight. They'll take their age. They'll record, obviously, their sex status and their gender preference, perhaps. They will take into consideration a simple dietary intake of what people are typically eating, for example, fruits, vegetables. They'll collect data in terms of what people's typical exercise routine is. And they will gradually work across different communities throughout the U.S., gathering this data over and over again. And this data becomes the foundation of understanding what are the habits and the health status of Americans. We do this because this helps identify for the dietary guidelines of America what we need to focus on in the healthcare profession and in public health in general. Education. So it is vital to collect this data. Now, mind you, the data is blind, which means, this is kind of an unfortunate part, because if you take into consideration countries like Denmark, who are very thorough in collecting data, and that data is related back to people. But in the United States, we keep it blind for private reasons. But that's unfortunate, because what if they collect data on someone and they have cancer? They can't go back and let them know. They just have to keep moving forward. The second type of data collection is BARFIS. And BARFIS is pretty simplistic. It's a phone system where they simply take a lug of different phone numbers and they call and they ask people a series of basic questions over the phone, and all self-reported, and they gather the data that way. Personally, I've never had anyone call me, but I wish they would. I'd like to experience it firsthand. All right, so how do we evaluate the body? Well, first and foremost, we take into consideration the BMI, the body mass index. Now, please, you need to understand the BMI is not a descriptor of a person. It is not there to categorize us in any way other than to be used as a screening tool. The purpose of the BMI is really so that when people come in, for example, to the medical office, you can do a very quick evaluation, height and weight, with a chart to identify. Are you normal weight, underweight, obese, overweight, or obese? Over the years, we've had to evolve obesity into different classes as people gain more weight. This is very quick and easy. We can use waist measurement as a screening tool also, which is highly relevant to heart health. But again, I need to emphasize this is a screening tool. Why? Because when people come in underweight, the odds are extremely high that they're malnourished, and we need to address that promptly. If they come in at normal weight, it doesn't mean that they're healthy, but we are going to target people who are underweight, overweight, and obese much more quickly for intervention. So overweight, this could influence things like blood pressure, obesity. It could accelerate the possibility of different diseases, which will be our focus partially here and partially in the chronic disease section. So this screening tool is very resourceful. It's wonderful in gathering information. But please note, it's not the end all. So just to repeat, what is the purpose? The purpose is to be able to very quickly screen people, and the payoff is intervention. Now, there are variables. Not everyone fits into the BMI scale. You know, some people it just doesn't make sense. NWO, normal weight obesity, is an excellent example. You could have a person who comes in at normal body weight, maybe they have a large bone structure, but they have very little muscle mass. But what they do have is a lot of body fat. Well, body fat doesn't weigh nearly what muscle mass weighs because muscle mass is a wet mass. So we look at them and we say, oh, well, your BMI looks great, your normal weight, no harm, no foul. Yet inside their body, without that active muscle mass, their body is a feeding frenzy for potential cancer and diabetes. So unfortunately for people with NWO, even though we do this quick screening, it is likely that they would get missed for evaluation of things like diabetes. And athletes, because of that wet muscle mass, oftentimes are coming in at a much higher weight scale. That's fantastic. It's a reflection of how much muscle mass they have. But for the BMI scale, it makes them look like they're obese. We've had several professional athletes who are incredibly muscular, and they do come in at the different categories of obesity. That has nothing to do with their health and well-being. Again, it's just the screening tool is truly for your average person and not your athletes. Hydration status. Your scale can be influenced by that. What if you just drank a lot of water? Well, water is heavy. It will attribute to your weight no matter what, pound for pound. If you drink 16 ounces of water, it will increase your weight by a pound when you step on the scale. On the other hand, if you're dehydrated, your body is suboptimal, it will actually reflect as a lower weight, yet that's not a healthy status. And then lastly, the BMI tool is generic, male and female, and yet females tend to weigh lighter with a higher fat mass. Males tend to weigh heavier with a higher muscle mass. So something else to take into consideration. At the bottom of the page, I gave you the BMI equation to identify on your own calculator very quickly. It's just if you're curious, but honestly, folks, it's, again, only a screening tool. All right, just so you know, there are different types of body fat assessment. I do have a little bit of a problem with this because the best form of body fat assessment really is the DEXA scan, and that's the scan we use also for looking for osteoporosis and osteopenia. It's a bone density measurement tool. It's the picture in the lower right-hand page where the woman's lying on the table. That is excellent for especially identifying people who are normal weight obesity. But folks, otherwise, for you to have access to this, you can. I mean, every so often, I will say I see on like Groupon, they'll have a promo where someone will be charging only $120 to have a DEXA. If you do it, please do it for your bone density first and foremost. Vanity should always come second. The bod pod is another opportunity to assess body fat, and this is like it's air plethysmography. And where you step into a little capsule, and I can't exactly tell you how it works, I don't recall, but the displacement of air creates the opportunity to calculate how much body fat to muscle mass, water, bone mass there is in the human body. Hydrostatic weighing, that's an interesting one. This is where you basically are strapped down to a metal chair in your skivvies and you are submerged into a swimming pool. You release all your air, you're held underwater. The displacement of water creates the possibility of a calculation to determine what you're made of in terms of fat, muscle mass, bone. Hydrostatic weighing was actually the original gold standard until DEXA scan became much more accurate. You will find DEXA scans, usually at medical facilities. BOD pod and hydrostatic weighing is oftentimes affiliated with kinesiology programs, like at Cal State Fullerton and Long Beach. BIA, bioelectrical impedance analysis. There are a variety of different versions. The best one is when you lay on a table and you put little electrodes at your feet, at your hands, at your neck, and on your torso. And this will evaluate an electrical current that will identify the amount of water mass attributed to muscle mass in comparison to fat mass. Again, you do a calculation. Even with this one that is the best version of BIA, you have to take 3 readings and then determine what the average is. BIA is found at some health clubs, or some people may have them themselves. Hey, but they're really not that accurate, so please don't turn to those expecting an honest assessment of body fat. Some are little scales that you stand on, like a weight scale, and honestly, the electrical current just runs up one leg and down the other. That's kind of defeating if you have thinner legs or thicker legs. Some have little handlebar that you hold on to while you stand on the scale. And okay, well, hey, that means the electrical current runs up one leg and through the one arm, and then up the other leg and through the other arm. Missing the torso, where the majority of body fat is for most human beings. Yeah, so those really are not very dependent. Skin calipers, what's in your lower left-hand corner, really is dependent on the skill of the person performing this. And I will tell you, I have only encountered one person who is excellent at it, and we compared her results to the BIA on the table with the electrodes. And she did this as her job in a research facility, day in and day out. It's really hard to be good at those. So if you have someone, for example, at the health club who is using skin calipers, please don't hold your breath and take it as gospel. Lastly, the waist circumference. If you recall, that's just greater than 35 inches for women, greater than 40 inches for men, is a determinant of the potential of heart disease. So that's just a generalized screening for people. All right, how do we establish how many calories people need for human health? How do we utilize this information to gain weight or lose weight? Well, first, starting with the BMR, that's your basal metabolic rate. This is how many calories your body needs to sustain you if you're in a coma. It covers basic functionality of human life: your brain, your central nervous system, your organs, your blood. All right. RMR is very close to BMR. It's just up a teeny bit more, and that is your resting metabolic rate. So that, let's say you're lying in bed resting, and maybe you get up to go to the bathroom, you get up to get a glass of water, but you go back to bed. This does not take into consideration variables like being sick. Your RMR is so darn close to BMR that we can just operate off of BMR close enough. Golden rule regarding the RMR is that we do not like women to go below 1,200 calories or men below 1,400 calories, because that ensures that you have got enough calories for all of your organs to function successfully without impacting them. So overall, when we take into consideration how many calories the human body needs, the BMR covers only about 50 to 65% of your expenditure. Now, obviously, an Olympic athlete the BMR would become smaller in comparison to the amount of muscle mass that they're using and having to repair on a regular basis. All right, to calculate a BMR, we take into consideration a person's height, the weight, their age, and their sex. This is the same thing that your program did. You inputted this information, and it basically provided for you what your caloric load was. Variables, folks, which to my knowledge, none of you have, would be things like pregnancy. Uh, Variables could include missing limbs, missing arm, missing leg. Variables could include things like burns on the body, where there's mass healing, or cancer, where there's extensive overproduction of cells. Once we establish the BMR, then we multiply it times an activity factor. And that was the question of how active you are. Do you have a sedentary lifestyle, a 1.2 activity factor? Are you active 3 to 5 days a week, 5 to 6, multiple times a day? These activity factors multiplied times your BMR will then determine what your final caloric load is to sustain, maintain your body weight and your life activities. We have two types of equations to identify this that you can use manually to determine a person's EER and BMR. Harris-Benedict equation was originally the standard, but as America has gained more weight, the Mifflin-St. Jeor has proven to be far more accurate with a higher body mass. And so we've kind of defaulted to using that one on a regular basis. By the way, just if you guys are curious to know what the different activity factors are, so that if you were calculating on your own, then sedentary would be 1.2. Light active is 1 to 3 times a week is 1.375. Moderate activity, 3 to 5 days a week, is 1.55. Active is 6 to 7 times a week at 1.725. And extra, which means hardcore manual labor or training twice a day. This would be when you're at that, let's say, Olympic stage. That would be a 1.9. So if you notice, we never go double our BMR calories. We come up just short of it. But dang, we could end up consuming a lot of calories if we're training that hard. And we warrant it. I mean, this is where we heard things like Michael Phelps taking in thousands of calories a day. Really impressive, because if you think about it, for his height and his weight, his baseline of calories without exercising is probably around 3,000. So he could very easily take in almost 6,000 calories a day when he was training for the Olympics. Wow. Hey, don't forget, calories are about quality and not quantity, okay? Be careful of that. All right, how do we get to this stage of obesity? Well, things to take into consideration. One, internal influences. There is something called a set point theory, the idea that our bodies have an expected body weight, and no matter how much we increase our portions or we decrease our portions, our body will always make an effort to return back to that set weight. I think that there's some truth to this, but there's also some misconception. And this is where people practice things like dieting, the yo-yo dieting. They lose weight and then they gain weight back again. And they think, oh, well, it's just that's what my weight is. And that's what I'm meant to be at. And that's not totally true, because dieting, folks, does promote a reduction in metabolism, which then causes a person to gain weight back. There is a way to successfully lose weight, but it's very slow, and it's dependent on having what? Oh yeah, variety, synergy, and balance on our plates when we talk about our dietary choices. Another thing to take into consideration that they've been exploring in research more recently is in your intestinal microbiota. The bacteria in your intestinal tract, are they determining your body weight? Are they influencing your dietary choices? There is a possibility. It's kind of a cart and horse conversation, though, because the question is, were you born with that bacteria that sustained your weight, whether it be high mass or low mass, dependent on your environment and your genetic structure? Or did your dietary choices promote or defeat healthy bacteria, which then promotes weight gain. This is early in research, so we don't have a lot of good answers, but there are some very powerful questions associated with this. Another possibility is what's called thermogenesis, and this is the presence of brown adipose tissue. This is intriguing. This is a specific type of fat that actually has mitochondria in it, which means it is burning calories rather than having the desire to store them long term. Bad is we think that there might be more of a prevalence of brown adipose tissue in children when they're really active, because this is what sustains their ability to stay warm out when the rest of us are cold. But otherwise, all humans have white adipose tissue. But some, just for whatever reason, we found some people do have higher incidences of brown adipose tissue, which means not only is their body very metabolically active in terms of metabolism, but their fat tissue is also very active in burning calories. So that would be a highly efficient beta oxidation of fatty acids. And third possibility for internal is genetic component, folks. We do know that people have in their DNA a genetic disposition. A great example would be Prader-Willi syndrome, where a person continuously eats. That's a genetic change. They continuously eat and do not self-regulate, are not able to stop eating. We do have in us a messenger called leptin, and leptin is the one that tells us, hey, I've had enough to eat, stop. If you notice with our agouti mice in the picture there, the mouse on the right has its leptin, which means it knows when to stop eating, whereas the mouse on the left is lacking leptin. They actually, I'm not sure if it was, I just noticed there's a typo in that picture. That's weird. The agouti mouse on the left, they basically manipulated the DNA so that the mouse did not produce leptin, which means the mouse just continually eats and eats and eats. This is similar to the Prader-Willi syndrome. So leptin, when disrupted, can alter our ability to self-regulate and know when to stop eating. Ghrelin, on the other hand, is the hunger hormone that communicates with you, hey, I'm hungry. Grumble, grumble, stomach, shaky hands, headache, weak feelings, lethargy, when the body's blood sugar is getting low. And ghrelin inspires us to feed ourselves. Now, do we have the ability to disregard these messengers? Yes. And actually, one is we can self-regulate. We can train ourselves to ignore both messengers. Or two, we are influenced by external. So, first of all, starting with your environmental cues, that which can influence our desire to eat. One, different foods. Hey, you know what? You see the pie reminds you of grandma's pie. Grandma has unfortunately long since passed away, and you're like thinking, oh, such happy memories. That will cue you to eat the pie because you want to emotionally come back to that happy time. Another possibility is stress, that when we experience extreme stress, we anesthetize ourselves, we soothe ourselves with food. Folks, this is what is dominant in our society, is when we're telling kids when they are successful at a soccer game, or they fail at a soccer game, or they do great on a test or poorly on the test, whatever that is, we end cap the emotion with foods, whether it be pizza, ice cream, whatever that is, alcohol. And those habits build us into a relationship of anesthetizing with food, highly, highly dangerous. Other environmental cues, portions. Portions have changed in the United States. They have become so much larger. I will tell you, when I grew up, the idea of a personal sized pizza was unheard of. I mean, it was just impossible. A slice of pizza was about a third the size of a Costco slice. So our portions have become much larger. Oh my gosh, when I was a kid and we went to McDonald's, the little bag of French fries, I think, was smaller than the kiddie size today. And you would get that one little bag and you would share it with friends. You'd sit around and literally portion out one fry for you, one fry for you, one fry for me, one fry for you, one fry for you, one fry for me, one fry for you, one fry for you. That was it. You were out of French fries. So we really didn't have the amount of food that you guys have today. Sodas, you know, some years ago in the prior century, sodas were 8-ounce bottles. Today we're looking at 16 and 20, 24-ounce bottles. It's absolutely ridiculous. What about displays of food? Seeing food presented before you. When you go to restaurants, I love Japanese restaurants. They display all the food in a big window for you to choose from. Or when you go to restaurants like buffets where the food's laid out in front of you, these are all cues to promote eating, to appetize you. Ads on TV, excellent at that. Ads at venues where they promote their foods and drinks, or freebies. Costco, going in and having all those wonderful taste tests will promote your desire to end up buying the food. You also want to take into consideration other things that can influence you. Smell is really powerful, folks. Also, again, walk into Costco. Think about it. You walk back into the baking section and they pump the smell into the store. That smell is so prevalent, it actually triggers the release of your salivary amylase because it's in response to you smelling carbohydrates cooking. So that's another opportunity where you're manipulated by your environment. Right? Individual behavior. This could be the person who really lacks the desire to maintain structure in terms of, let's say, having set eating times or sitting down at the table to eat rather than walking around with food, grazing, snacking, all dangerous behaviors which promote nonstop eating. Your built environment also influences the likelihood of obesity. Do you live in areas that have safe parks to play in? Areas that have lit streets so that you can walk around at night, areas that have bicycle paths for you to ride. Or is it inner city environments where there's very minimal opportunity to be outdoors, to exercise, to be active with friends? Social influences. This is family and these are friends. What are the eating habits of other people? What do they do when they gather socially? Do they gather to play games, talk, go for a walk, or do they gather to eat? Where do they gather to eat or even to drink? Societal forces that also can promote or influence our obesity. The government. This would be communications, education. The government can influence us in terms of what foods are taxed, what foods are subsidized, like our grain industry. You know, folks, by the government subsidizing corn, it makes corn syrup really cheap. It makes grains for corn cheap, which means that they feed cows with less cost. Well, less expensive feed for cows means that it keeps the beef industry prices lower. And then you've got companies like McDonald's who then is able to mass purchase beef at a much lower cost and produce fast food for really inexpensive. It sets in motion an increased opportunity for obesity. Economics. People have this misguided belief that when we don't have a lot of money, it is cheaper to go buy a dollar meal than it is to invest in whole foods. Unfortunately, though, I like to think of that as pay now versus pay later. You're spending less money now on the food, but you'll pay more later in health costs. Another one is social norms. What is considered the norm for eating? Again, going back to that thing, are you in a work environment, for example, where there's a soda machine in the building and everybody drinks soda because that's what's there and it's just the routine? Or are you in an environment where at work they constantly order pizza and that's the norm? That's what you just do rather than going against the grain. These will all strongly influence our relationship with foods. All right, you do have a video link here on YouTube. This is from the bigger picture, and I would like you to look at it because it's actually specifically talking about diabetes. But in this case, it's talking, this one targets how the built environment influences diabetes, and it really influences our dietary choices. So it's a great video to watch. It's maybe 2 or 3 minutes, really short. All right, hunger versus satiety. So we talked about the fact that there are different hormones, ghrelin versus leptin, and that ghrelin's job is to cue us when we're hungry, when our blood sugar is dropping, to ensure that we have nutrition to sustain our brain, our central nervous system, our organs, and our muscles for movement and energy. Leptin, on the other hand, is there to communicate with us that we've had enough. We need to stop. We need to self-regulate so that we do not overeat, which then is known as being full. If you think about this, folks, in terms of a scale of 1 to 10, 1 would be starvation. You're hungry. You're up in the Andes and your plane crashes. You don't know what to eat, or rather you don't have anything to eat, but you've got to survive. All you can think about is survival and not much else. At that point, eat your fellow soccer players. They're dead, no harm, no foul. You're going to sustain your life though. On the other hand, 10 on the scale is Thanksgiving. You overate, you are the stuffed turkey. You lay down and you cannot move. You feel so sick from overeating. That is excess calories that will it will burden your body, and it will convert those calories to fat as quickly as possible. So where do we live then in the world between that 1 and 10? Well, on that scale of 1 to 10, we really want to be in the 5 to 6 zone, which is really kind of homeostasis. I'm feeling good, not too hungry. I'm not hungry. I'm doing life. I'm busy. I'm active, or maybe I'm quiet and reading, but I don't feel any hunger. My energy level is strong, positive. When you're starting to get wisps of hunger, little messages, that's when you're like walking around and you start to notice other people's food, or you just randomly start thinking, wow, a bowl of soup seems like a great idea today. Those are your initial impulses to eat. That is a great time to eat, folks, because at that point, if you stop and you eat when you're first starting to just gradually think about food, and that's kind of the I can eat now, I can eat in a half hour conversation, then you are likely to eat less food, which means less calories, but enough to sustain blood sugar. If you wait until you get to a stage 3, that becomes the I'm hungry now. Time to eat, get the food, sit down. You're starting to feel the hunger pangs. You might be getting a little shaky, a little bit of a headache. This is your body saying, feed me now. If you get to a 2, folks, that's the hangry stage. The rah, rah, rah. You are grumpy, you are miserable, no one wants to be around you, and someone will inevitably shove something in your mouth to keep you quiet. You've gone too far, and hormonally your body is responding to that. Okay, on the other direction now, you've eaten. You're starting to feel a sense of satiety at 7. That's where, at 7, that's where you're like, wow, this is really good food. I feel great. Notice I feel great. I don't feel full. I don't feel stuffed, but I no longer feel hunger. It's a great place to stop, folks. That would be when you have 3 meals a day and you opt to have snacks in between when you're feeling a little nibbly, a little hungry. If you decide to go until the stage 8, that's where you feel great, but you're like, oh, I just wanted one more bite. You stopped at one more bite. When you are looking at the food and you keep picking at it and you get seconds, and rather than being modest with the seconds, you load it on, that's when you get to a 9, which is, oh, I'm getting really full. I just gotta sit back and rest for a little bit while I digest. Yeah, you know what? At that point, you really have eaten more than your body needs. And it would have been better if you would have stopped at the 7 or 8. We need to get out of that 9, folks, because that's where a lot of people eat to. And again, the 10, man, I'm carving you for Thanksgiving. All right, at the bottom of the page, there are 2 really awesome books referenced here. One is The Salt, Sugar, and Fat, which I had referenced back in the Sugars lecture. Really great book about industry influencing our desire to eat. That's and manipulating us to eat more. That would be an external influence, salt, sugar, and fat, altering chemistry in the body. And the other one is The End of Overeating by David Kessler, who used to oversee the FDA in the days of having extraordinary leadership. He had a lot of contact with the food industry during the time when they were developing all of their knowledge and information on brain chemistry and understanding what does influence human health and how they applied that to foods. For example, he has a great section in there about Doritos, Frito-Lay, how they figured out that when we make things really sticky on foods like Doritos, the powder coating, and then we lick our fingers, that actually lights up messaging to our brain of pleasure. And that pleasure makes us want to eat more. Folks, that's otherwise known as food porn. So great experiment if you want. Eat Doritos. Eat them with your fingers. Lick your fingers and see how many you eat in comparison to if you ate them when someone else fed you or you used something like chopsticks or gloves so that there was no finger licking. They taste different, folks, because your brain is perceiving the taste differently. Kind of a fun thing to experiment with. All right, so here's a question for you, and this is actually going to be on your board as to discuss, folks, what are the possible external cues as triggers? I'd like you to go through and really write about all the different possibilities that can influence our weight. Included in that, I encourage you to post any articles, research articles, or video clips that you feel really represent successfully those that can cue us to eat more food. That'll be one of your participation activities. So please go to the website to participate in that. All right, this is just a review for you of the whole process of taking in food and achieving a sense of satiety. All right, so back to that conversation of obesity and when we overconsume nutrition. Well, there are 8 health risks of obesity. First and foremost, those which have the greatest influence by dietary choices and sedentary lifestyle. Number 1, diabetes. Number 2, heart disease, which heart disease, folks, is the number 1 cause of death in the United States, cause of mortality. Number 4, gallbladder stones, directly related to nutrition and lifestyle. Number 5, non-alcoholic fatty liver. Okay, that's not to disregard that the others all have direct ties also with nutrition and lifestyle, but these 4 in particular are just absolutely profound responses to dietary choices. For human health, folks, to reduce the likelihood of diseases, take into consideration also to reduce likelihood of changes to human health like inflammation, arthritis, varicose veins. We need to lose body weight by 5% to see an improvement in health conditions, or possibly up to a 10% weight loss. This is when we're considering people who are overweight or obese. So a 5 to 10% weight loss will actually promote a shift in the human body to reduce the likelihood of different comorbidities, diseases that go hand in hand with weight gain. This means reducing the likelihood of diabetes if a person is pre-diabetic, of hypertension if the person is hypertensive or pre-hypertensive, reduce the density of a NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, so that the liver will start to release some of the fat, reduce the likelihood of cancer, stroke, heart disease, and sleep apnea. Folks, if you're not familiar with what sleep apnea is, it is disruption of sleep from excess body weight, especially in the neck region, which will close off the person's breathing ability while they sleep. So they'll stop breathing and typically wake up with a startle. Well, that disruption of sleep actually then over time reduces the person's metabolism, increasing their weight gain. So it's really vital to reduce weight and reduce the likelihood of something like sleep apnea, which requires a CPAP machine to sleep at night. Okay, signs of change. Well, how do we create change? First and foremost, it's diet, folks. We look at the quality of food. This is why if any of you had put in weight loss for your diet analysis or even weight gain, it was a no-go, because first and foremost, we have to identify a balanced diet to give the body everything it needs. For some people, that actually immediately induces change in weight. Second to diet will be portion control. Second opportunity to alter weight is going to be lifestyle change. The habits that we have. This includes stress management. This includes sleep hours and behavior overall generally during the day. Sedentary lifestyle, sitting around watching TV all the time versus getting up and moving around. Exercise, another huge player in weight loss. For some, weight loss does involve medical weight loss programs like medications or meal replacements to help people reduce their intake. And then lastly, bariatric surgery.